Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday office hour for Unit 1 of the Introduction to Data Science module. Just getting set up here. Yeah, as usual, I will look at the questions on the message board, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have for me in the live chat as well. Just to advertise, I also just finished recording a final lecture video for the week. So I'm going to be uploading that now. So this is 2.3.1 VC mini project intro and HackerRank coding challenges. So this lecture, bonus lecture about or introducing the VC mini project and a resource called HackerRank for practicing your programming skills. So some students had asked for additional resources outside of the course for practicing programming. And this video introduces a site called HackerRank. Which is dedicated to giving you coding challenges to practice your programming skills. It's has really good challenges on here, and I highly suggest you check out this lecture video and try out HackerRank yourself and see if you find it valuable for practicing programming. Okay, a lot of questions about the PW Mini project, which is also I'm going to deprioritize since I don't quite expect people to be working on that yet. So if you're working on that, you're most likely quite far ahead. And I'll leave it to other students to assist you at this time and focus my attention on students who are not quite as far ahead. So I'm going to be opening up these questions about the IP mini project or the VC mini project, or any questions about other problems. I saw this question before. Unfortunately, I'm not really sure what it's asking. Your question is somewhat unclear. Running just import matplotlib.pyplot as PLT should never give an error. Well, at least should not give the error you've written here. That basically should never happen. This should always work, at least on Jupyter Hub, because we have matplotlib installed already. just cutting out some of the extra words from the title. Remember, a title is a title. It's not the post. Okay. So, PW, Unit 1, Exercise 4. Okay. So someone has written some functions trying to answer question 4, but there's a couple of problems here. So one is that is prime fast. If we look at the question definition, it tells us is prime fast will take a number and return whether or not it is prime. So is prime fast should accept a argument. There is prime fast actually does accept an argument, but their get primes fast function, which is what they're passing to grader.score, does not. It then says now return a function which will find all prime numbers up to including n. And we give a stub here, get primes fast, with an argument n. So from the instructions, our get primes fast function must accept an argument n in order to answer the question. In fact, we give a function stub for you to fill out. Your get primes fast function takes no arguments because you have defined it as def get primes fast to be able to submit your function successfully to the grader, it will need to be able to take the argument n supplied by the grader. Additionally, your functions will not solve the problem since they do not actually do anything to calculate whether or not the number n, since is prime, does not actually do anything to calculate whether or not the number n is prime. Additionally, your get primes function does not return a list of prime numbers. It only prints out the results of is prime fast. Also, that your get primes fast function currently uses number, which is not defined in the code you have pasted. Instead, you should use the argument of getPrimesFast. And as described before, getPrimesFast should take an argument. You may want to search the discussion board for other questions about this mini project, for code examples that might help you along. Okay, another PW mini project question, another PW. Lucas Lamer. This is not a question. This is not a question. Please express in words why you are encountering difficulty or what you think is wrong with your code. Simply posting your code and saying you got a low score is not sufficient. You must ask a question. Right, so don't just post your code. You must ask a question. Posting your code and saying as if like, and expecting people to just come tell you, oh, your solution is wrong here, here, and here, and here's what you need to do to fix it, is not okay. Other students are not here to do your work for you. I am not here to do your work for you. You must at least try and think about why you think your code is going wrong, not just based on the score you're getting, and then post a question about your solution. So for example, I don't know what's going wrong with their code because I have not and am not going to look at it. But perhaps say they have a problem with their getPrimes function. Just imagine. Then the results of Lucas Lamer prime are not going to work. They're not going to be right because this depends on getPrimes. And they might say, okay, I know, for instance, that the number 7 is a Mersenne prime. So LL prime, or Lucas Lamer say, LL prime for, primes NP. If I had 1, 9 here, should tell me that 7 is prime. That should come out. If it doesn't, then I know I have an issue. So as a student, if you're not getting the score you want, you need to start investigating your code using test cases of your own design to check where in your code things are breaking down and not working as you expect. And then you ask a question about that. You can't just post a whole block of code and expect people to come fix it for you. So here's another question in the same style from the same student. So for example, check that is prime 7 returns true, because 7 is prime. Test it with other numbers. Do you get the results you expect? Test your getPrimes function. It's your job to debug your code and to the best of your ability, and share what you found in your question. You may not post code without any analysis and expect others to fix it for you. You must share what you have contributed. Solving the problem. When we write import, what exactly are we importing? A class, a function, or any of those? Great question. If I have something like import collections, this imports a module. A module is simply a file or collection of files. Or a package. So collections here could be a file like collections.py. That's a module. Or it could be a directory, collections, that contains an init.py along with other .py files. That's called a package. When we do from collections import counter, this is importing a class. From math import square root, this imports a function. Usually you can tell the difference between importing a class and importing a function, because usually classes are capitalized, whereas functions are all lowercase. But whatever we're doing, essentially, Python is looking into some .py file, and either loading in the code, all of the code in that file, or loading in some part of it, like a class or function definition, or even a variable in that file. So even I have things in my work like from lib.sessions. So I have in a directory called lib, I have a sessions.py file. Import sessions, all caps. This imports a variable from a sessions.py file in a lib directory. So that's something from like some of my own work. If something is like written in all caps, then that's probably a global variable from some file. But yeah, like I said, always what's happening whenever we do any kind of import is Python is reading some .py file and loading in either some part or all of the code contained in that file. So I mentioned this in the introductory video, but I know it sometimes happens and people get confused. Do not alter these greater.score statements. I know it happens sometimes by accident, but try to avoid it. Because the grader talks to a server that requires the question name in order to grade the problem. And if you change the question name, then the grader won't be able to find the question to grade the problem, and you're out of luck. So don't change these cells unless explicitly told to in the instructions by like, say, pass such and such a thing to the grader. And usually we try and structure the questions in a way where you don't have to alter the grader.score part at all. But you certainly should never edit this part. You're very welcome. That was a very good question. So as I mentioned also in the introductory video, and has been answered in the message board, Occasionally, Jupyter Hub has an issue connecting to the grader. Doesn't happen very often, but it happens sometimes. In which case, you just need to run the grader.score code again. It's not a big problem. So if you see an error like this, just run it again, and there's no issue. What exactly does this expression tell us? What this is doing is the grader is going to supply you with a list of points in the form of tuples, x comma y. We're iterating over that list for point in points, and we're constructing a point object out of each tuple. So that's what that says. You don't really need to do anything with that. So in the VC mini project, we give you this code, this function that will answer the question as long as you have correctly defined the point class. All you need to do is, as it says in the instructions, once you've written a point class that is capable of what we describe above, execute the cell with grader.score. Do not edit that cell. You only need to modify the point class. So these are just functions that will take your point class and use them to answer the questions we've defined on the grader. Same goes for this like add sub results function or this mult result function. We basically set these up for you so that you only need to work on the point class. And yes, this is a list comprehension. Actually, no, it's not. Sorry. I got confused because it's in a list, but it's not a list comprehension. No. List comprehension always includes a for loop inside of it. There's no for loop inside of this list, so it's not a list comprehension. A comprehension always involves iteration. There's no iteration in the what's written there. So just a reminder, if you encounter a technical issue like you cannot connect to your server, you should email dsmodule@wqu.org, and they will be able to help you. The message board is really more or less intended for curriculum questions. And I only check it more or less once a day. Whereas we're checking the dsmodule@wqu.org email several times a day for any kind of technical issue that people are experiencing, and trying to fix those as soon as they happen. That said, let's see if I can actually fix this person's machine. First of all, let's see if it's actually broken. It does not appear to be. It appears to be working normally. So that said, your server appears to be working normally. It's possible it was a transient issue. I'm Unit 1, Exercise 3, sample output. I am going to delete this. Do not post solutions to the message board. The message board is for questions. So I've already given this warning on the message board. I will not be giving this warning again. So I'm probably going to send out an email at some point soon, reiterating the rules for the message board now that more people are interacting with it. But if you post solutions to the message board, I will delete your thread. The message board is meant for questions. And I realize this is maybe a little bit confusing, but it is okay to post code or parts of your results as contexts for asking a question. What is not okay is posting your code or results without a question, whether those results be correct or incorrect, whether that code solves the problem or not. You must be asking a question, whether that's how can I improve the style of this solution? How, like, my solution isn't working and I've noticed that this function doesn't return this result, but I can't figure out why. You need to ask a specific question when you post to the message board. Does the function reduce accept the lambda function as its argument? Yes, it does. So reduce is like a really weird function. It's not super common, but it is a sort of concise way of expressing a particular idea, which is why I used it in this bit of code that you're not supposed to alter. Really, this code is like sort of for me rather than for you. So I went ahead and used it. But naturally, that leads to people being curious about what it does. So let's talk about what it does. So what reduce does is it accepts two things as arguments. A function, we'll actually call this, we'll first define a function called running sum, which accepts two arguments, sum and number. And what it does is it returns sum plus number. So we can see what this does is essentially we compute a running sum by passing in what the value of our current sum and some number, and it returns an updated sum. So the first argument of reduce is some function that accepts two arguments and combines them in some way. And then the second argument is an iterable. And what this does is it iterates over this iterable, and that becomes the number. This gets initialized to 0 at the start, and it's just going to add number to this sum, and it iterates through this iterable, sort of like passing where number iterates over this, and each number gets combined with the argument on the left in some way. So we can do this, we can use this to do a few different things. We can do, for instance, reduce lambda string character, and we'll return string plus character. And we could, for instance, I wonder if this would work. Yeah, so this isn't so interesting, but what's happening here is initially this string is empty, and we concatenate to the empty string the first character of this string. So we end up concatenating together this entire string character by character. Reduce also takes another argument, the initial value of this first argument. So we could say like hello is the initial value, and then we would get a concatenation of hello, where we concatenated the characters from this string onto hello one by one. So reduce has very situational use, but it's generally used for aggregating data together in some way. Whether that's like performing a sum or a concatenation. We could multiply together a bunch of numbers. Of course, since the first number of 0 through 9 is 0, we would get 0 as the product. So there's a lot of things we can do with reduce based on what we define this function to be. It doesn't get used that often. So in this case, what's happening is we have a bunch of point objects in points, and it's just summing up all these point objects. So initially, x is sort of nothing, and it adds the first point object, which then gets passed in again as x, and we add the next point object, and that folds into x, and we add the next point object, and that folds into x. So we sort of like iteratively fold y, which is iterating over all the points. We fold those into x, and the way we do that is by performing a sum. You know, some people invest a lot of effort into making like cool formatting marks for their code snippets, but they don't actually check whether or not their code is formatted correctly, and don't use the tools in the discussion board that are there for formatting code. Okay, so this is a somewhat better question. I tested my code with 2 points as below. Great. So now we've got a question where where the student is testing their code that is much better. A times B, what's the result of A times B? I don't know. Okay, so their definition of multiplication is we return a tuple containing 2 numbers. This is not what's asked for in the question. The question says there's many kinds of multiplication: scalar multiplication, inner product, cross product, matrix product. We're going to implement scalar multiplication and the inner product. We can define the inner product as points as this. Your code does not do what the instructions ask. The question gives a definition of scalar multiplication and the inner product. Your mul function does not do what the mathematical definitions express. I suggest that you look back at the instructions try to understand the mathematical formulas and implement them. In your mul function, using type, or checking the type of the input, as you already do for point objects, to decide whether to perform scalar multiplication, which should return a new point, or an inner product, which should return a floating point number, or just a float. If you are confused about the formula, please ask a new question about it. Greater mini project VC. Cool. It's performing well, all sums are cumulative, but it is performing a sort of running sum, where X is the running total and Y is the next value that we're going to add to the sum. That's like one way of interpreting what's going on in that reduce function. Must ask a question when posting a question. It is not sufficient to post code and ask someone to fix it for you. You must include tests you have run to try to figure out why your code doesn't work, or some analysis of where your code might be failing. Number divisible by 2. Yeah. Your round, oh, yeah. The important difference here is that we add 1 after casting the square root into an int. Rounding will often round down rather than up. We essentially want to take the ceiling of the square root, since we need to include the square root itself as a possible factor. E.g., the factors of 9 are 1, 3, and 9. We need to check, oops. For example, the factors of 9 are 1, 3, and 9. We need to make sure that our loop includes 3 itself. Is functools a package where reduce resides? How many functions are there in functools? Yes, functools is part of the Python standard library. There's a whole bunch of documentation about it. If you're interested, you can have a look. It even links to the source code, and it documents all the functions that are part of functools in this document. I haven't used functools very much. I've pretty much used it for reduce, this wraps function, and this partial method class. Or sorry, actually partial. I've used it for this, not partial method. So I pretty much only used it for those 3 things. But there's a lot more stuff in here. Or maybe not a lot more, but there's a few more things in there anyway. The functools module is for higher order functions, functions that act on or return other functions. So we see reduce is like this. It acts on, or at least accepts a function as an argument.
Sure. It is. Okay. Which way?
Can't pass a list into the function. Your function treats p as a number. So it's going to be difficult to then pass in a function for p. Which question is he answering? Yeah, this is correct. So it should accept p as a number. Test of the Mersenne numbers with prime p between 3 and 65 are prime. Your final answer should be a list of Mersenne exponent. Da, 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 da. Ah, okay, so they're maybe just a bit confused about what they should do afterwards. It seems like if your LL prime function is written correctly, then it is currently returning 0 when 2 to the p minus 1 is not prime, and 1 when it is. To finish answering this question, we'll want to write a function that uses LL prime in a similar way to how get primes used is prime. In other words, we could have a get LL primes function, which say like p start, p end, or just like p values, where p values is a list of exponents, and it returns a list like p LL prime p. Containing tuples. This function would be very simple, and in fact could easily be accomplished by a simple list comprehension. In other words, you don't really need to go define a whole new function to do this. You could just do a list comprehension using LL prime. One small note, when doing this, it will be helpful if LL prime just returns 0 or 1 rather than 0 or 1. Additionally, it is bad style to have to define global variables like new list and then mutate them inside of a function. We have pack and unpack functions. Is there functions like expand? Pack and unpack functions. Zip packs toList, doesn't it? Can zip pack tuples as well. Zip effectively is its own inverse. So if you zip two things together, and then you can zip them apart as well. So for example, I could do zip 0, 1, 2, A, B, C list. So I could do something like this. And then I could also print zip star zipped with a list around it so we can actually see it. And it unzips them. So zip is more or less its own inverse. We just need this, we just need to include this unpacking syntax with the star. But there are not things like, there's no pack or unpack functions per se, nor is there an expand function. Zip is about the closest as you're going to get to these sorts of things. Okay, that's the end of the hour. Once again, I didn't quite get to all the questions. There's a lot of you. There's one of me and quite a few more questions than I'm used to. I think just because this is the largest section of this class that we've taught so far. So it makes sense that there's a lot more questions. You know, next office hour, I hope to catch up and hopefully my prioritizing of the questions and the way I've been doing them has been helping those who most urgently need help. I know that, you know, some of you may be along to the PW mini project and you're really frustrated and you really want help. But if you're working on PW already, you've got plenty of time. And also, if you've already made it there, I trust that you will probably figure things out on your own, given enough time as well. So eventually we'll catch up with you, don't worry. And I'll try and get to your questions as soon as I can. But for now, I have to prioritize those who are not as far ahead. So new lecture will be uploaded shortly with the link and the download. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow.